retain the trust of your customers and your employees when the world around you is falling apart? It's a question that Professor Veronica Hope-Hailey, Associate Dean of Cass Business School, has been looking at for many years. I asked her if this was a problem even before the financial crisis.
No, certainly we were researching through a project called the Change Management Consortium, and we looked at public and private sector organisations. And what we found was that there was what we called the trust gap. So the same people asked for levels of trust in their line managers were actually recording quite high levels of trust with their local managers. Asking the same people about the trust in senior managers, the trust levels by and large, with the exception of one organisation, were much, much less, and in some cases quite terrifyingly less. But there were exceptions.
Pretty obvious question, but I presume it's got an awful lot worse since the financial crisis?
Well, we have not been researching during the crisis for obvious reasons, because it was very difficult to get access into organisations whilst they were dealing with the crisis and the recession. But my expectation would be that there's probably a mixed experience. I think some organisations have worked very hard to try and maintain levels of trust during the crisis. For instance, I was just talking to Norton Rose just before we did this interview, Alex, and they took a very bold decision as a city law firm to deal with the crisis and the recession by 97% of their employees and partners voting to go to a flexible working solution. And that flexible working solution, moving to 4-day weeks for those that opted to take them, has actually meant that they've maintained very good levels of trust during the recession. I anticipate that places like John Lewis will have maintained good levels of trust. GKN, the multinational engineering group, shed nearly 20% of its workforce, but has just won the CBI award for employee engagement. So that there's a very mixed bag here. Some people have purposefully set out to manage during the recession in a way that maintains levels of trust and engagement. But in others, I expect there's a different story, and we're about to go on and start researching that.
Lots of organisations are facing difficult times at the moment because of the economic crisis. Lloyds Banking Group is one example. It's laying off 15,000 staff. How can you go through a process like that and retain the confidence of your staff and your customers?
Okay, well, there are certain key lessons that we've learned from our research about how you can mitigate against some of the impact of job losses. And one of the things that you have to do is sort out how to be just and fair in those situations. Now, one of the things is that maybe the decision is to cut jobs. However, the procedures you use to identify those branches or those jobs that will actually be cut should be transparent, open, and seen to be fair to the man on the Clapham omnibus. So one of the ways you mitigate against this is what we call procedural justice. The procedures are seen to be fair. The second way you mitigate against this is using interpersonal justice. So the way that they manage that downsizing, the way they communicate job losses, the way they deal with those who are actually losing their jobs, must be in a way that treats those people with dignity, with honour, and in a way that actually thanks them for their contribution in the past. And research has shown that if you can show you've got high levels of procedural justice and high levels of interpersonal justice, that can actually offset, if you like, the unfairness of the job cuts in the first instance, both for those going from the organisation, but also those staying in the organisation, the survivors.
You're about to set off on a new research area into this field. What are you looking to find out?
We're about to start a research project funded by the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development into trust repair. And we're going to be looking at two things, Alex. One is those organisations who actually managed to maintain trust through the crisis and the recession, and I've already mentioned three of those. So we'll be looking at John Lewis, GKN, Norton Rose, but also those who have potentially lost trust in the crisis and recession, but who are seeking very purposefully to repair trust. And that's what we're going to be looking at over the next 3 months.
One last question. Do we as consumers and as employees sometimes perhaps trust organisations a bit too much?
Well, that's a really interesting thing to say, because we assume that high trust levels are always positive. And we do know that good levels of trust increase speed of decision making, innovation, appropriate risk taking, etc., etc. So there are really good things from high trust levels, but there is a shadow side, there is a dark side. And if you get excess trust, or you just trust too much, we have instances like Harold Shipman, the doctor who killed 217 patients. We have Nick Leeson from Barings, who managed to create such high trust levels around himself and the back office that nobody actually realised that he was taking Barings to bankruptcy. So there is this shadow side of trust, and we need a balance. We need an appropriate level of trust, but we also need to encourage a healthy level of distrust and encourage senior people who challenge, question and scrutinise what's going on in our organisations, for us as customers and for us as citizens.